All right, so I just watched Ozark, uh, The Fate of Ruth. Now, I know most of us probably wanted to see Ruth, maybe have a spinoff or something like that. And I think the show is really about trying to show that the righteous hero, which we see in every movie, is first of all, it's the exception. And secondly, they don't fare very well in reality. And that's sort of like the lie of cinema that helps create this impression of opposite land. And we see opposite land kind of coming unglued, like with Cosby and Spacey and Weinstein. We're starting to see that all this evil stuff exists. And for example, like the Weinsteins that are producing these movies, they're presenting a version of reality that's saying that the righteous hero wins in society and it can get the Weinsteins. But in reality, it's not getting the Weinsteins. The Weinsteins are controlling the simulated hero story. And two shows, Ozark and House of Cards, are really transparent about that, to the point where now that it's been simulated, I'm hoping that society can go in the other direction, because that seems to be how it works. I mean, we like to think that the world used to be where people used to care more. Like you had Eisenhower and Kennedy, and they stood up to this evil. And now this new era of politician is kind of just assimilated into this evil. And but it's all the left hemisphere. That's really what opposite land is. If you look at right hemisphere damage, uh, all the major cognitive disorders resemble right hemisphere damage, like being a psychopath, a sociopath, denying anything anti-you, narcissism, autism, schizophrenia, OCD, all that stuff resembles right hemisphere damage. Not that they all are present in each case, if that makes any sense. They recently had a schizophrenic patient that had all the symptoms disappear. And they put him in an MRI machine, and they saw that he was having a stroke in his left hemisphere. And once the stroke subsided over a few weeks, his schizophrenic symptoms returned. So what is the left hemisphere, right hemisphere? Basically, the right hemisphere is grounded in concrete experience. It's trying to apprehend all the sortas and maybes of experience. And then the left hemisphere is grounded in the right hemisphere. It takes all those sortas and maybes and tries to make them into definites and absolutes, whether it's a pattern or like a new bureaucratic rule or a new technical rule. The left hemisphere is sort of like, or it is, our human-invented mind. Everything our left hemisphere does is about what's artificial, what's human-invented, and what's human-invented acts according to one-to-one relationships or definite, absolute conclusions, like if A, then B, and definitions that are non-ambiguous. So definites and absolutes, that's why I say that. There is like one exception. The left hemisphere will tolerate sortas when it recognizes specific machines. It recognizes all machines, all devices. It makes an exception for specific machines. It recognizes specific machines and specific letters and specific words. Even though it's using a strategy that's used by the right hemisphere. The right hemisphere is going, it can be, and it can't be anything else I know. Whereas the left hemisphere wants to make a one-to-one relationship. Like, if this criteria, then this abstract category. That's what it's trying to do. Forgot what my point was. The left hemisphere expands its reach. It expands its non-ambiguous definitions and its absolute conclusions by making everything digital. It has to be abstracted from experience, but usually it uses analog categories instead of digital categories. You could see that every science fiction movie is sort of warning us about the overemphasis of the left hemisphere. I mean, especially starting with Space Odyssey 2001, where Dave is the right hemisphere and Hal, the computer, is the left hemisphere. And the left hemisphere is basically the automated plan, the automated interpretation, the automated reaction. And our left hemisphere is revising things. It tells us when things are not going according to plan and how to fix it. And the left hemisphere is trying to oppose all of that. And you can see that in right hemisphere damage. It's like blissfully unaware. It's not even aware that the right hemisphere exists. It operates independently. What else? A million things. Since the right hemisphere is grounded in concrete experience, the right hemisphere develops faster than the left hemisphere up until adulthood, and then it sort of takes over. And you can kind of see the childlike mind versus the adult mind. And you can also see that society is like a bell curve of the right hemispheric fringe and the left hemispheric fringe. And on one side, you have like the good doctor who's autistic. And then on the opposite side, you have this other fringe, which is like House MD. And it's the outside the box thinking doctor that's rough around the edges and acts childlike and thinks like a child and asks questions like a child. And the opposite side thinks very well. The opposite intelligence is like the Stephen Hawking or the good doctor, and it thinks very well within the box. And that's kind of what's valued now, and you can see that the world's moving that way. And it's what all the science fiction movies are kind of warning about by stealth. It's not even really conscious. In fact, every movie is, and every historical conflict is really a left hemisphere, right hemisphere thing. Like you can see it in Star Wars or like say The Patriot with Mel Gibson, where one side is always more aristocratic, bureaucratic, technical, conventional in their battle strategies, but they see the other side as primitive, even though the other side is more creative in their battle tactics, like guerrilla warfare, or Napoleon used to, like, usually the more conventional side marches right towards the other side in some sense. And then the more outside the box thinking side is either guerrilla warfare or Napoleon used to attack from all sides, which is interesting. And he introduced chaos into the battle. And since he was aware that there was going to be chaos, his side would be more prepared. That was his idea. Yeah, so there's this theme in all our movies and history, and makes it really interesting, but also kind of scary. Like this is a simulation in a sense, because this left hemisphere, right hemisphere stuff goes all the way down to birds and things. Like a bird will peck at seeds on the ground with its right eye, right side, left hemisphere, while it looks out with its peripheral vision with its left eye, right hemisphere. because the left hemisphere is about focusing in the center of the visual field, and the right hemisphere sees the peripheral, which is sorta. You can see the sorta-ness of the right hemisphere and the kind of like the definiteness of the left hemisphere, even in the vision. It's like cross. It's in how it thinks and like how it sees the world too. It's weird. What else? A million things. The left hemisphere understands uniform intervals of age. That's what I mean how it's artificial, because there's no such thing as these intervals of age. Like, there are no seconds. There are no meters. So, and then the right hemisphere recognizes gradual aging. So it's able to recognize faces, and that's because it can say, when it sees a person's face, it can be that person, it can't be anyone else that I'm familiar with. It's not saying it is this person because of this criteria. That's what the left hemisphere does, and that's why the left hemisphere is not very good at recognizing faces, unless it has like a one-to-one relationship with a really unique feature that it could see from afar. That's the only time the left hemisphere would be involved with that. Because the left hemisphere, its definitions and its conclusions are all one-to-one. So if you have the question of like whether someone's old enough to drink or not is an automated decision for our left hemisphere. It's bureaucratic mind. But for a right hemisphere, it's like you're checking for the person's maturity level and you're looking for clues. But it's not in the realm of something definite or absolute, because these definite and absolute lines aren't really there. Also, this extends to like philosophy of science. Like, the electron mass is not literally composed of like joules, these uniform units that are human invented. But our left hemisphere has to pretend that it is, because it can't handle, first of all, that the electron mass is variable, and it carves away anything qualitative, because the qualitative aspect is useless. It does this with math. In fact, if you were teaching math, you see, the problem is that the teacher jumps into the abstract picture and it tells you, add 5 to both sides, do this and do this to try to get this result. And if you tutor, you might, like me, you get questions like, what is it? But what is an equation? And it's because a lot of children need a concrete picture, like a tug of war. And then they can see all the properties of arithmetic and how they're obvious, rather than throwing like associative property of addition and things like that at people, or even a negative number. Like in a tug of war setting, like a negative number is like if someone changed directions and started pulling in the opposite direction, right? And of course you could add you can add 5 to both sides in addition, because you can add Brad to one side and his twin brother Chad to the other side, and it wouldn't make a difference. Now, of course, these are all sortas. Like, it's only sorta equal. And it's also, it's balancing of forces in nature are really neither of that. It's really not even a sorta. It's like like your coffee cup sitting on a desk. There's something that's quantitatively identical, but also not identical, because obviously the force exerted on the table and the table pushing up on the glass in an equal and opposite way, they're qualitatively different. They're not equal and they're equal, but in two different senses. And that's how nature actually is. It juxtaposes opposing concepts as opposed to either or, this concept rather than that concept. And that's what the left hemisphere does. So the right hemisphere actually can directly apprehend experience, and it's more accurate. It's accurate. Yeah. So it makes everything digital because it can expand its reach, and it would be very difficult to like teach history, for example, without like years and stuff and showing when events happen. But there's an artificiality to all of it. Even like when we say this person did this at this point in history, and then something completely different at another point in history, and we're confused because we think, like, say Bob is the same person as he was before, but it's really, we're just these quasi-uniform preferences. And as we get older, our priorities change, even our sensory preferences change. Like, we might be more sensitive to smell, and that changes everything. It changes all our decisions. And so something that we do when we're younger, it's ridiculous. Like 20 years later, you're a completely different person. You mean quasi-uniform. I'm just saying anything that's exactly uniform is our left hemisphere making stuff up. But this video was originally about Ruth and the left hemisphere and how it presents an opposite land. NATO. So America is kind of like the center for opposite land. You got to think of Wendy Bird. Like, she got the smile on her face, or Hillary Clinton, how she looks like a real estate agent. And interestingly, the left hemisphere, which is overly cheery, the schizophrenics, they will draw virtual happy faces. They can't draw real happy faces because, see, the left hemisphere is virtual, and it's abstracted from experience. And it doesn't draw unhappy virtual faces, though, because the left hemisphere is biased towards cheeriness. Like, it's kind of like going in denial. It's trying to protect you from having to revise your plan. That's basically what the denial is all about. Even when people get upset, most anger is triggered from the left hemisphere, and it's because you're breaking their expectations. And that's actually a lot of what people are mad about, is their expectations are being disrupted. A lot of it is from movies presenting an opposite picture of the world, presenting the exceptional or the exception as the rule, presenting the righteous hero as being successful and improving the world. That doesn't happen as much anymore, and so it's misleading, and you're presenting it as the rule or as if we've figured things out. That's how I felt when I was younger, and reality started to become something that seemed like the opposite. It felt like, I actually forgot what my point was. I felt, like no one understood what I was talking about. Until recently, when I was younger, I used to say everything is fake, but really what I mean is everything seems like the opposite of what we're being told. Like, you can see, like, in the West Wing or any kind of early, like, 80s or 90s movie with a politician and they care and stuff, it might be Morgan Freeman, but like the difference between what Obama's doing and what Morgan Freeman is I mean Bill Clinton told Kevin Spacey that, like, most of House of Cards is real, and Kevin Spacey's not trying to hide anything either, according to his brother. So opposite land is kind of being exposed. You could see Putin doesn't fall for NATO's opposite land tactics. It knows that NATO's going to say one thing and do the opposite. And it knows that they're going to say, we're not surrounding you. Putin knows that they are surrounding him. Ukraine is kind of like the naive person that thinks that NATO cares about them and is going to help them. but really it just wants to improve its own thing. It's not going to sacrifice. So the Ukraine's finding that out, that version of opposite land. Russia already is aware of it. Not that I'm supporting what Putin's doing either. Yeah, this has been like the struggle of 1,000 generations. And even the child-student relationship is like a left hemisphere, right hemisphere. You know, the good teachers are the ones that aren't trying to dominate the students, but they're trying to like work within their emotional and sensory preferences. You know, using the tug of war example, presenting a concrete picture. Also, if I was teaching algebra and stuff, I wouldn't be giving them word problems at first. I would be trying to get them to play with the graphing, because you can get any program online that can graph any equation for you, and play with the eccentricities and like whether it's an even or odd function, and make a little ocean floor and cut and paste domains. And you're talking in football, each unit of the graph paper is football fields, and you're trying to like making something artistic. Once you start word problems and things like that, you're adding layers of abstraction, Common Core as well. Like, you need to start with the concrete and then we're getting too precise too soon, sort of. See, the right hemisphere does everything that the left hemisphere does in a less precise way, but it's good enough. Even like estimating costs, we don't need exact answers. We know we have like $100, and then we sort of estimate, okay, I need to get lunch today, I need to get this shirt, and I need to get money for Bart, and I'm gonna have to leave a tip, and it'll cost like $85 or something. But what the school system is giving us is this precise answer that's only useful to like a small select class of people in certain situations where there's large numbers. So we're not missing anything by starting by playing in a metaphorical, artistic way to teach math before we jump into word problems and other abstract things. I think that's all I want to say for now. All right.